Good evening. My name is Paul Doherty, and tonight's presentation deals with the challenges that George Washington faced as he moved the Army into winter encampment at Valley Forge, and then some of the major steps he took to rectify many of his problems. Now, the Army had just culminated the Philadelphia campaign, which consisted of the British moving out of New York City, moving up through Delaware after getting off of the ships along the river in the Chesapeake. And they were met by Washington at the Battle of Brandywine. Uh, he was able to retreat from this battle, but it allowed the British to continue their movement towards the capture of Philadelphia. By December, after a number of smaller battles, which did not go well for the Americans, Washington was deciding what to do with the army. He pretty much wanted to put them into a winter encampment, but he faced a lot of pressure from the Congress, which was out in York, Pennsylvania, and the state legislature of Pennsylvania. He lacked support from the local populace. Many of them were Quakers. Very few of them wanted to get involved in the war on either side. The army was critically short of food and clothing. Washington had to deal with a developing coup that a number of senior officers in the American Army were staging in order to get him removed from command. Now, at this stage, he displayed an extraordinary amount of leadership. He immediately ordered a number of measures to sustain the force that he had at this particular point in time. For example, he mapped out the entire Army, a series of unit locations, and he ordered that every soldier be involved in constructing these 12-man cabins that he expected them to be erected all the same way. So it was a standard 12-man cabin for each soldier. That kept them busy, kept them disciplined in the early stages of the encampment. Washington was in continuous communication with Congress, attempting to get them to provide the resources necessary to sustain the Army. He even instituted a massive inoculation program in order to diminish the effects of smallpox on his army. In the first 2 months of 1778, Washington realized that he was in competition with the British to forage for local resources, and that his logisticians were grossly incompetent and ineffective. Fortunately for the American cause, Washington placed two extraordinary leaders in his most important positions. First, he appointed General Nathanael Greene as his quartermaster. Now, Greene was initially reluctant to assume this position because he desperately wanted to keep his combat command. However, once Greene took charge of the logistics aspects of the Army, he quickly utilized more manpower, substantially increasing the number of wagons and horses to be utilized in foraging operations. Washington had identified through his intelligence network that the British were planning to mount a massive foraging operation well beyond the borders of Philadelphia itself. To counter the enemy's efforts, Greene devised and executed a foraging program of his own and used combat units to attack and harass British foraging parties. He was extremely successful in these operations. Secondly, a professional Prussian officer, the Baron von Steuben, reported and introduced himself to General Washington at Valley Forge. Von Steuben had met with Benjamin Franklin in Paris, who was very impressed with his credentials, and sent him to meet with the Continental Congress. They actually concurred with Franklin's recommendation. The Prussian officer was commissioned as a general in the American forces. Now, von Steuben immediately assumed command as the inspector general, and after observing the state of affairs in Valley Forge, he devised a plan to standardize the manual of arms throughout the Army. He instilled discipline, and he drafted a field manual that codified the drills that he had taught to the American troops. Due to the extraordinary efforts of Washington, Greene, and von Steuben, the American forces left Valley Forge in pursuit of the British, who had vacated Philadelphia and were moving back to New York City. The Americans were better equipped, better trained, and a much more professional fighting force than they had ever been before. And many of these aspects manifested themselves in a highly successful set of tactical operations at the Battle of Monmouth later on in that summer as they were chasing the British back to New York City. Now, this concludes my presentation for this evening. Thank you very much, and I really look forward to seeing your presentations.